I move 4.4, Resolution 2015-180. It's a resolution amending Chapter 7.5 of the Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board Code of Ordinances.
All right. And do we have a presentation on this one?
Don't everybody rush to the podium.
Exactly. Thank you. I thought maybe you might want to say a few words.
Chair Tab, Commissioners, we don't have a presentation prepared. As you recall, this bubbled up from the discussion that we had on trail standards that was presented to this board several weeks, if not a month ago. At that time, Commissioner Vreeland asked staff to take a look at this, and what's before you is something for board consideration. I'm happy to answer questions if there are
Chief,
any.
do you just want to sort of give in a nutshell, so for the TV audience, what we're talking about here?
So what's before you today is repealing the Park Board ordinance that requires a 10-mile-per-hour speed limit for bicycles on pathways. There's already ordinance language that requires operation to be reasonable and prudent. That language would remain. That ordinance is not impacted by this change. The only thing that would change is that the numerical 10-mile-per-hour speed limit would be repealed.
All right. And I noticed that we had some press on this in the paper, or I think yesterday or today. Is there any discussion on this item? Commissioner Olson.
Oh, well, I'll yield to Commissioner Forney first. I may not have to say anything after she's done.
Commissioner Forney.
Yeah, I'm having difficulty with this and understanding what's reasonable and prudent. What does that look like? And you know, when you're bicycling around the chain of lakes versus Theodore Worth, those are entirely different. The amount of people that are out on our paths is very different, and I'm having a great deal of difficulty in getting my head around this, and not having any numeric indicator. It's difficult for me.
So, Chair Tab, Commissioner Forney, the test that we would use for reasonable and prudent is similar to what we use for careless or reckless driving, and it's an analysis of the totality of the circumstances. So, for example, things like weather condition, pavement conditions, visibility, the grade of the trail, the user density, the rider's ability and or impairment, all of those things would be taken into account during an interaction with somebody who may be in violation of the reasonable and prudent ordinance. So commonly that would rise to police attention if someone was involved in a crash, if there was a complaint about a specific operator, or if we were on patrol and witnessed something that was disturbing, and we looked at all of these circumstances and we found that that operation was not reasonable and prudent.
So basically it's a reactive response than a proactive response. Meaning until something happens, we don't know whether or not that's reasonable or prudent.
Well, there's certainly an opportunity to observe operation, which would be proactive.
I guess to me what's missing is everybody's definition of what's reasonable and prudent seems maybe perceived differently. And we've been a part of this discussion, I know, before, well before me, but it seems so much upon the user to be educated about what's reasonable and prudent, and what are we doing to support their understanding of what that is. It seems to be making way for a lot of, well, a lack of clarity, I guess, is the biggest thing. And I was with a group of 25 bikers this afternoon, and they all had a great deal of difficulty, with this, and whether or not we can keep some sort of numeric. And I know that bicyclists today, or the bikes, I should say, in particular, it's more opportune for us to go more than 10 miles per hour. Whether or not 15 is a more prudent and reasonable way of signing things. I'm not sure, but I just have a lot of difficulty with this, the way it is.
May I respond?
Sure.
Chair Tab, Commissioner Forney. One of the fundamental problems with having a numeric speed limit is that the bicyclist doesn't know how fast they're traveling. There's no requirement to have speedometers on bicycles. There are some people who buy speedometers and put them on their bicycles because they want to know how fast they're going. And if they do have that, I don't know that that speedometer is accurately calibrated. And so we put a numeric speed limit, in this case 10 miles per hour, and frankly, I don't think the vast majority of people bicycling on our trails have any idea how fast they're going. I did a very brief speed survey this afternoon that lasted about 15 minutes. I took a laser unit out and I checked the speed on 13 bicyclists over the course of 15 minutes. Of those 13 bicyclists, only one was going under 10 miles an hour. The average speed was 14 miles an hour. I had someone traveling as fast as 20 miles an hour. And I had a young lady stop me and ask what I was doing. And I told her, and I asked her how fast she thought she was going. And she said 5 to 8 miles an hour when she was traveling 14 miles an hour.
All right. Commissioner Olson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Well, Chief, I appreciate the predicament and the difficulty that this puts you in with having the signage and trying to enforce it, the speedometer and all those things. I'm a recreational bicyclist, sometimes more often, sometimes less, just depends on the year. And pretty sure I go over 10 miles an hour, but I don't travel like commuters do, and that's the difference between our bike paths and the street. The street, they're marking all over the place for commuters, and that's great. And folks that are commuters generally want to get from point A to point B as quickly as they can. When I go out on the bike paths, it's for recreation. I've got combined paths in my district, like along Victory Memorial Parkway, where I'm fine with having the 10 mile an hour. I know people are going to go faster than that, but if there's no sign, they're just going to go faster, and it's just going to create problems. So I respectfully disagree with the thought that we should take the signs down. I think we should leave them up and leave it at 10. I don't think it's unreasonable, and I know it's there's a difference of opinion on this board, but it really is a recreational bike path system, not a commuter system, and I want to make it very clear to people that there's a difference.
Commissioner Young, I believe
Thank
you were
you.
next.
Thank you, Chair Tab. I personally think that this is a almost worthless discussion in the context of it just seems like one of those, don't our police have better things to do than be figuring out who's going 10 miles an hour or 14 miles an hour or whatever? I understand, especially on the chain of lakes, that there are probably some bikers who need to be told to slow down, or, I mean, I think, they don't stay on their paths, probably is more important. But I guess I just don't want to waste our police officers' time. We have so few police officers, and I can't imagine that the list of violations isn't much, much longer and has many more cases and worries than this. And I don't see why we have the signs. I think the young woman is probably the example. What she thinks and what the laser says are two different things. It kind of reminds me, and my analogy is the protests that were going down Lake Street, and the guy who in his car somehow decided to not abide by the street light and whatever at Cedar and went right through the protesters. I mean, when you ask the question, Commissioner Forney, of what's reasonable and sensible, it seems like 99.9% people do know what's reasonable and what shouldn't be done. And so I will be voting against, I will be supporting this of, like, let's just get rid of the speed limit and taking up police officers' time.
I think Commissioner Irwin is next, and then Freeland and Olson.
Thank you, Chair Tab. I'm not on this committee, and so I just wanted to ask a question just out of curiosity. How many bike collisions are we seeing because of potentially people driving slower and faster on the same bike path?
So, Chair Tab, Commissioner Irwin, we don't have good numbers about bike crashes. Unlike motor vehicle crashes, which have state laws and reporting measures that are required of people who are involved in accidents, there is no mandate for people involved in bicycle accidents to report that to the police or Department of Public Safety or anywhere else unless that collision is with a motor vehicle and there are injuries. So if you're in a car crash and there's a certain amount of dollar damage or there's any reported injury, the state requires police officers and the drivers to submit state accident reports that are then reviewed by the Department of Public Safety, and they put out very comprehensive crash data. That same format does not exist for bicycles. So the only bicycle crashes that we know about are ones that are extreme, where people end up going to the hospital in an ambulance. The vast majority of bicycle crashes are unreported because they're relatively minor in nature. The mechanism of injury is very different than that of a motor vehicle. So I don't have good numbers for you as far as the number of crashes on our pathways that don't involve motor vehicles.
I would ask that first because that would suggest whether there's a problem or not. Like right now, I don't know if there's a problem.
What I would say anecdotally is that we don't write many serious accident reports involving bicycle crashes on pathways.
So as a follow-up, are there specific areas where you believe that there are potentially more crashes or bicycles hitting pedestrians?
The majority of bicycle crashes that I'm experienced with have more to do with things like trail conflict across parking lots and across crosswalks or where trails merge together. Even in cases like the Chain of Lakes, for example, which have high density use, the majority of those trails are one-way trails. The vast majority of the people are operating in a reasonable way within the system that we've established, and considering the amount of use that those trails have, there are very few accidents.
So I guess the comment I'd have is that, on our streets we have different speed limits depending on where there's greater potential for accidents or where there's more people present, and there's variation in the speed limits. And near where I live on West River Parkway, you go down a hill and you can go awfully fast down that hill underneath Franklin Avenue, and it doesn't seem unreasonable. So did staff consider lifting the 10 mile an hour through parts of the system where 10 makes no sense, and then having other signage where we do have that conflict, where we have people crossing the bike paths and roads and parking lot issues and all that?
So, Chair Tab, Commissioner Irwin, I did not myself participate on the trail standards, but one of the things that we are looking for here is consistency throughout the system and consistency with the trails that feed our system in conjoining agencies. The idea of having certain areas where there may be no numerical speed limit, but then placing numerical speed limits in other areas means that we would have to do a great deal more signage, perhaps painting on the trails, than what we even currently do.
Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Freeland?
Again, I think the time has come to change the limit. It's not like there's a lot of information out there that tells people what the limit is. It's not enforced. Certainly, I'm not a great bicyclist, but I could do 25 miles an hour going down Suicide Hill fairly easily. I've been working on this and chatting with folks for over 5 years. I think Deputy Superintendent Ringgold might have some perspective on the conversations we've had with Bicycle Advisory Committee and the Bike Coalition.
And Commissioners, one of the things that I will, maybe a couple of things that I'll point out is that in my 15 and a half years here, spending much of that time on the Bicycle Advisory Committee, this has been a popular conversation. Removing the speed limit and retaining PB 7.5-9, which talks about reasonable and prudent, is most akin to how other systems are doing this, how they are managing their systems and the flow on them. So it puts it on par with, say, the Three Rivers Park District system. And that's when we've talked about this before. We've talked with them a little bit about how that works for them. And basically, it's easier to identify basically reckless or inappropriate behavior than it is to identify a speed limit issue. So it's easier to, if you're looking at wanting to be able to provide safe trails, that's been easier for them to identify and ask for the individual to reform their behavior or provide a ticket depending on the scenario. So that's why they have used it, and that's why we've considered it in the past. The other piece is that we commonly talk about our users of our trail system broken down as an A, B, or C user. An A user is a user who is somebody who can go in traffic easily, is very sophisticated in their skill set. A B user is what our system is targeted at, somebody who prefers a dedicated piece. And then a C user, someone who's a child. And it's important there is that we have recreators and commuters at all three of those levels. And so ours is really looking at that B user of both a recreator and a commuter, because some of our recreators are, quite frankly, some of the fastest cyclists that we have in our system. So those are some of the points that we've talked about in the past.
I just want to quickly add, again, I've been part of conversations with trail reconstruction in several, for West River Parkway in my neighborhood, for West River Parkway here. And again, it's been a recurring theme that we should get rid of the mile per hour limit. The other issue is that we are tending to push people into the streets and in traffic because of the 10-mile-an-hour limit. And it's a lot safer to have folks that are doing 20 miles an hour not in front of a car that wants to do 25 or perhaps 30. So again, if we can get some of the conflict, I mean, that's where people are really getting hurt, is the conflict between cars and bikes. If we could do that, I know, I mean, it's counterintuitive, but the flow, safety, signage, the clarity of this, I mean, it's counterintuitive to say that if you add more stop signs, the road will be safer. It actually isn't. If you get a better flow, it's actually safer. So that's kind of where we're headed. And I think we have a 6:30.
Yeah, I think we're right.
You do. And before I let the meeting go, I also have grave concerns about this. I understand that it's very difficult to enforce, but I think that the 10-mile-an-hour signage gets a message across to people. Don't speed on these trails. I hear what the Bicycle Advisory Committee has to say, but they're self-serving. Those are bicyclists. What about everybody else out there? I tried to teach my grandson how to ride a bike several years ago, and I'll tell you what, I live very close to Cedar Lake Trail. It is, I won't even take him out there. I wouldn't, it's just scary. There's got to be some sort of give and take for this. And I hear that people, I don't know if 10 is the right number, but I think what we're trying to do is say, you don't go fast. You're out here to look at the butterflies and the trees and the birds. And I think that's the message that I want to get across on our recreational trails. With that, I will recess this meeting and we will.
We got to vote, don't we?
Yeah, we do.
Or recess.
Well, do we want to come back to discussions?
Let's just get it done.
Okay. All right. All those in favor of resolution to amend Chapter 7.5 of the Code of Ordinances, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed?
No.
No.
Motion to adjourn.
Okay, so did you vote no? Okay, so motion does not pass.